Sage Wanderer here, and welcome to episode 3 of Unmasking the Dark Side. This week's episode is about Christianity, about a form of it, at least, a supposed form of it. As a Christian, I wouldn't be a fair person if I didn't look at my own religion first, as I uncover and unmask all of the ways that these various institutions, from Christianity to Islam, from Freemasonry to the government to Hollywood, how they've all been penetrated and infiltrated by a serpent cult, by the dark side. And I'm uncovering all of the many ways that they connect. And so to be a fair man, I have to look at my own religion and the influence of the serpent cult in my own faith. So you have to look at Christianity, you kind of have to start with Catholicism. And we know right now that the Roman Catholic Church is embroiled, and has been for decades, in a scandal of epic proportions involving the wholesale sexual abuse of young boys within their own organization by their clergy. That this is a clergy problem, this is a priest problem. And as it turns out, as bishops and cardinals and popes cover up for these pedophiles, it seems to be that it's a systemic problem that is generating from the very highest levels of the Roman Catholic Church. And although there are many great videos on this topic, this signature is obvious and not what I really wanted to talk about, because this series is more about connecting them historically along a timeline so that we can follow the snake from its original den, from its original pit of iniquity, and see how the snake and its many tendrils and offspring have come to cast a net, a web around the earth that is destroying our planet, our people, our lifestyle, and our world. And we have to come together now to point out that there is a snake in the camp, a serpent snake. So, a serpent god, as it were. So you can't talk about Roman Catholicism without getting to the core of what most people think is the most dark element historically of the Catholic Church, and that is the Jesuits. One of the things that does come up on my channel is not the Roman Catholics or the papacy, but specifically the papal spies, the underhanded invisible hand of chaos that works for the Pope, known as the Jesuit order. So, I found a great quote by a famous person. Marquis de Lafayette was a French statesman who served under George Washington in the Revolutionary War. So he came over here to help us gain our independence from France. Well, our independence from England, but he came from France. He said, and I quote, "It is my opinion that if the liberties of the United States are ever destroyed, it will be by the subtlety of the Jesuits, for they are the most crafty, dangerous enemies to the civil religious liberty. They have instigated most of the wars of Europe." So this is in 1776, or thereabouts, between 76 and well, in that period. And he already was labeling the Jesuits as, this powerful force of chaos in the world. So the Jesuits were created as a counter-Reformation army. They needed a group of spies to undo the Reformation, the Protestant movement that was tearing apart the Catholic Church and gutting it from the inside out. They could have done the right thing and examined their own organization and listened to the reformers' complaints, but instead they took the authoritative route and built a spy army to destroy the other side. God help us. So they were created for this purpose at the Council of Trent by a council of cardinals. And it wasn't just the Jesuits that were created then. Several other orders were created as well as the Jesuits. The Jesuits, whose actual name is the Society of Jesus. This organization was founded by a man named Ignatius Loyola. He originally was a soldier. And I gotta say that I served under a guy who was originally, he was a preacher, but he was originally a cop. And I've got to say that he was unable in my opinion, to loose himself from his cop ways and ways of thinking and opinions. And he had this real gotcha kind of religion that just did not sit well with me. It seemed like he set speed traps for his own congregation to try to set them up and catch them in gotcha moments. And he just seemed like the thought police. And he just couldn't help himself. He couldn't find a way to be a pastor and minister to people's heart with love. And so, like this cop friend of mine, I think Ignatius was always a soldier first in the way that he thought. That was his original plan for life. He wanted to be a great commander of men, and he wanted to go and further free the Holy Land, and he wanted to be a crusader and all of those things. And he did get a taste of war, and he did get a taste of battle, and he was nearly mortally wounded. He was maimed by a cannonball and his leg nearly blown off. And it was devastating to him. He spent months and months in hospital, recuperating, recovering, undergoing numerous surgeries, which were are no fun now, but were really no fun back then. And I suspect that there was probably at least a bit of opium going on there, if my timeline is correct, that would be available to him, which might also additionally speak to some of the other issues with this man in the future. But dealing with great amounts of pain, his career destroyed, he searches out a new vocation and a new meaning in life while he's laid up recovering. And because he can no longer be a soldier. You know, I knew a guy who became a preacher because of an odd circumstance. You know, he was a master carpenter and ran a crew of men building houses, and he was quite happy in that life. And one day he stepped backwards into a opening hole on a third-story platform in a house he was building into a stairwell that did not have stairs yet. And he fell 3 stories, impacting his heel and destroying his lower leg and maiming him. And that is why he became a preacher, because he could no longer do what he wanted to do, which was be a carpenter. And so he decided to be a preacher instead. He was actually a pretty good pastor. He loved people. But Ignatius probably decided to be some kind of priest during a religious experience that he claimed to have had while laid up in hospital. And he went on to take on the life of a monk. And some people say that he had a nervous breakdown, and push come to shove, and some time later he ends up living in a cave like the old desert fathers, beating himself and punishing himself and starving himself and fasting and seeking God and trying to find this deeper meaning in life and trying to make some kind of connection with God. And like many of these false religions that you will see spring up from this kind of activity, from this kind of fractured mind, what you end up with is someone who then has an encounter with an angel, like Joseph Smith, like Muhammad. That these angel religions that people have these encounters with tend to not necessarily be of God, and there tends to be a pattern there. And this kind of encounter was how the Jesuits were also birthed and formed. And a little twist on this angel is that this smoky angel apparition turns into a serpent for our friend Ignatius Loyola, the founder of the Jesuits. And this angel serpent, then, the story, the imagery of this can be found in a book, a multi-biography about numerous different people by Jean Le Couture. And so in it is a visual that I'll share with you. That this smoky image came into the form in the air near him, and this form gave him much consolation because it was exceedingly beautiful. It seemed to have turned into the shape of a serpent, and having many things that shone like eyes but were not eyes. He received much delight and consolation from gazing upon this object. So he had this encounter, this spiritual encounter with a serpent apparition while in the cave. This launched his ministry, this experience, and apparently it endued him with spiritual power and authority and abilities, and he became famous as a mystic for the rest of his career as a minister. That he surrounded himself with some disciples, and he put together a first-class little cult that I think historically seems to suggest were mostly women who followed him, young women, very young women. And so he's kind of got this little harem happening around him of, sounds to me a bit like Charles Manson and his little family. But when he would preach, these female acolytes would roll around on the ground and flop, would weep, would shake and quake, and pass out and fall into trances while he would preach. And he became quite well known, and twice in his life he was arrested for suspicion of being involved in a secret society known as Umbrado. This secret society is kind of a precursor to and related in many ways to what we would eventually be known as the Illuminati. So it's a serpent cult. He had a serpent encounter. He got serpent powers. And then he went on to hijack the Catholic Church from the inside out. So Pope Paul III felt like he needed an army of spies, and the Jesuits seemed to fit the role perfectly. So he did something that was unprecedented in church history. He gave an unprecedented, unbelievable, and total power to the Jesuits. He really gave the leader of the Jesuits papal powers over his organization. And it empowered the Jesuits to do all kinds of things to fight these heretics that they were known as the Protestants. And so it gave them the power to arrest and imprison, to excommunicate. It gave them the power to prosecute. It gave them the power to, they gave them exemption from all prosecution and absolvement from all sin. So they could commit any crime, they could commit any sin, and they were exempt from prosecution, and that they were already pre-forgiven for any sin that they might commit, as long as it was for the benefit of the church. And one of their sayings, which is a part of their oath, is the ends justify the means. That they were even told to commit these heinous crimes joyously as an act of worship, knowing that they were doing the work of the Pope, and ultimately it was God's will. And so they could commit any heinous crime from rape and murder on down with joy and happiness as an act of servitude to the Pope. So it was madness, absolute madness. That it even gave them the moral justification to kill. In fact, killing was seen as part of the job of a Jesuit, and that they would be called upon to murder people. In fact, from their own oath, it says that they will spare neither age, sex, or condition. That means that they will neither spare age, babies, they won't spare sex, women, and they won't spare condition, old people. So they won't even spare babies, women, and old people. That they will hang, burn, waste, boil, fillet, strangle, and bury alive these infamous heretics. And that they vow to rip up their stomachs and wombs of their women and crush their infants' heads against the wall. There it is. There's your serpent signature, the hate of babies, the hate of innocence. The no quarter, no mercy, even for babies. It's the sign of the serpent god. It's the signature of evil. It's pedophilia and child sacrifice. It's the serpent cult. So, with this new power, he goes on to build an army. This organization, by this point, is an organization that goes on to build an army, and they use a set of techniques that come from Loyola's experience in the cave with the serpent. And so it's really, I think, the first real images of MK Ultra programming. The mind control techniques that they use to program these accolades that would come and join their cult. and become Jesuits. The initiation process was by their own document stated and designed to break a person's mind like breaking a horse. That it was designed to break their personality, to break down their sense of ego and self, and to destroy their own will, creating a mindless robot that would do anything as long as it was following orders. And that they got this processed into a 30-day process that was based on the cave experience. And the goal was to break down the personality and get you into the position that he was in that cave, so that you can have your own mental breakdown and your own serpent experience. Do, do, do. So this is definitely the same mind control process that you see in MK Ultra. Many of the techniques used in the indoctrination process of a Jesuit from antiquity, according to their own documentation, is very much akin to MK Ultra, and I suspect may be the very root of the very first MK Ultra programmers in this evil organization that penetrated the Catholic Church more than 500 years ago. These words are from their own oath, that their purpose, their stated purpose for the church is as such, and I quote from their oath, that their purpose is to insidiously plant the seeds of jealousy and hatred between communities, provinces, and states that were at peace, and to entice them to deeds of blood, involving them in war with each other, and to create revolutions and civil wars in countries that were independent and prosperous. The ends justify the means. So as we uncover darkness, we see that the serpent has insidiously, and purposely, and intentionally, and craftily involved himself in every aspect of our society, just like he always planned to do. That this Luciferian cult, this Khazarian, and even before that, this ancient Babylonian cult, this mystery religion, has infiltrated every religion, and every religion is now corrupted at its highest level. It's infiltrated our government, it's infiltrated our entertainment industry, it's infiltrated the business and banking, and honestly, it's such a part of us that there's only a small elect of us who are aware of the serpent cult and actively work against it. So continue to pray for me as I delve deeper to unmask the dark side. Thank you.